This is the degree that the commanding, the direct and honest, the assertive voice, which to me is just issuing loud and clear commands. This is the impact it has on other people. One of our attendees is sitting still. He's not moving a muscle. He's got an Apple Watch on. He tells us afterwards, as soon as I hit him in the face with the loud, clear, commanding voice, his heart rate immediately jumps to 170. You cannot think clearly if you react like that.
111, 110.
You training to be a street cop?
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Street Cop Training Podcast. I'm your host, founder, and CEO of Street Cop Training. My name is Dennis Benino, and this is one for me today, that's for sure. And I don't know if Chris Voss realizes that I'm a fan of his. I watch a lot of your YouTube videos. Follow you on Instagram. I've read your book. Only book I've ever read 3 times. And it's fantastic, dude. And I got to tell you, I talk about your book in my classes all the time. And namely, like the introduction of the handshake, your first name, why this is important, how you're establishing connections. And I think every cop in the United States, we have 500,000 subscribers here, needs to buy Never Split the Difference and read this book or listen to this book. So I appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate the community you serve, too, having come from that in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, can you give us a little history of where you grew up, how you got into law enforcement, and how you progressed to being one of the top FBI negotiators?
Yeah, well, I was a police officer, uniformed cop, Kansas City, Missouri. I got there because I grew up in Iowa and small town guy. Didn't grow up in the country. I want to tell you something. The guys I went to school with who were on farms used to call me a city boy. You know, the city I was in had 7,000 people in it. But small town Iowa guy, and mid-teens, I saw a movie about a couple of cops in New York City. And these guys were innovative. They were mavericks. You know, I didn't really have a full appreciation for how much they were mavericks at the time, but they were innovative. They did a lot of good, and the community loved them, which both those things appealed to me, serving a community that actually cared that you were there. And so I was inspired by that, but it chose Kansas City because it was the closest city of the 3 cities that were close to me where I grew up, Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Everybody raved about Kansas City. And when I got down there for good reason, I mean, I loved the town, extremely well-run police department, very progressive at the time, and I'm sure it still is. I just don't know. But I loved it. And then my father got me to look at federal law enforcement. Not knowing one federal alphabet from the other, DEAs, FBI, CIA, didn't know what one from the other. I put in for the FBI. You know, it was fate was guiding my choices, and ultimately ended up in New York City on the Joint Terrorist Task Force. And then remember the SWAT team in Pittsburgh to stop before New York City, and then became a hostage negotiator in New York and loved that as much as I loved SWAT. Negotiation appealed to me even more. And I remember reflecting back, you know, the great detectives, the people that I knew in Kansas City, especially, that were great with people. You know, it was a similar skill to hostage negotiation, you know, applied emotional intelligence. And since I love that, you know, anything you love, I think you work to get better at and just immerse yourself in, and ultimately ran the Bureau's international kidnapping negotiation response last 7 years of my career.
It's amazing. I know a lot about your history and the book. When did you start recognizing that you had good communication skills and you could really, connect with people?
Well, there was a difference between when I recognized the value of communication and then when I got good at it. Like in Kansas City, when I was there, good for me, bad for the detectives, there was a dispute between the administration and the detectives. And the detectives contended that at the time, if you became a detective, it was tantamount to promotion, and consequently they should get a raise. And one of their contentions was, once we go to the detective bureau, we never get back out into the street in uniform. So the administration said, oh, well, we'll fix that. We're going to put most of you back out on the street in uniform and defeat that. So I ended up suddenly working with guys who were great communicators, and they would speak gently to people and use tones of voice and get them to comply and do things that, my assertive, commanding voice could never get people to do. So I remember recognizing that and really sort of wondering, what was the magic here of tone of voice? And then when the time came that I decided several years later, I want to try hostage negotiation with the FBI, it was all about tone of voice first, word choice second, but, tone of voice first. And when I just like to learn, I like to get good at stuff. And when I saw how impactful that was and what an accelerator of outcomes it was, then I was really into it because I'm a very results-driven person. And when I found out that this soft skill was the best accelerator of results and positive outcomes, then I was all there.
When I teach my program, and, again, I don't find it offensive if you don't have too much context of this company. We have 50 instructors. We teach about 30,000 cops a year. And, a lot of people are showing up and looking for not just Fourth Amendment advice, interdiction on criminal interdiction highways, consensual contacts, all this stuff that we teach. But we also kind of put our arms around people, especially the newer guys, and say, here's some things that are much better to learn now than 5 years from now, and they'll save you the trouble of having to figure it out yourself. So we try to be big brothers and sisters to the next generation of how to behave and how to lead and what emotional intelligence is and how to be selfless. But I tell people in some of my rants in my classes, wouldn't it be amazing and so serving to the law enforcement community if the day one of the academy, they give you the best advice of your life, and it's, welcome to law enforcement. You're here. You're about to go into the field in 6 months or 4 months or 5 months. Here's your first piece of advice. Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick is literally worth its weight in gold, because when you learn to not be a dick, everything just gets so much easier. Now, there's some people you can't talk to, but not many, right? And so you'd have people calling me on the road, hey, we want to get consent for this car, but they're saying no. Where are you at? And I'm like, a minute away. And they're like, can you come by here and get consent for us? And I'm like, yeah. So like, how do you get these people to give consent? I said, well, I'm not violating the Fourth Amendment. So we can first start with that. But think about how I'm talking to them. I want you to watch and listen to what I'm saying to them. I'm giving them their options. I'm building trust. I'm letting them know that there's nowhere to go. And if you got to go somewhere, it's going to be with me. And I'm the guy you want to be with. So I it's so funny how it correlates. And I'm such an advocate for the kind of training you put on. I mean, even the YouTube videos, they're worth watching. And it's such an important skill for law enforcement to know. Can you elaborate on how important it is to know the things that you know and employ some of this stuff outside of the business settings?
Yeah, well, it's not making things worse. And a lot of people do things to make it worse inadvertently, and they just don't know it. I mean, and I'm a firm believer that the vast majority of problems between law enforcement and the minority communities, the disadvantaged communities, they're training issues. And the outside world, outside of law enforcement, wants to make it about skin color, and it is not. It's about the way people are wired and people catching each other at the wrong time. I'm listening to Andrew Huberman's podcast. I'm a big fan of Huberman.
Yeah,
puts a lot of neuroscience out there. And he's just talking about relationships in one podcast and saying, by this way, I think people are kind of driven principally by 4 neurochemicals, estrogen, testosterone, dopamine, and I think the last was serotonin. And he said, all right, so now the testosterone-driven people tend to see everything as a challenge. And I thought, oh man, of course. Like, first of all, I'm that way. Somebody asked me a question where they don't believe what I'm saying. I'm like, how dare you? I look at it as a challenge. I look at everything as a challenge. So picture somebody, law enforcement, who's wired to see everything as a challenge. And then picture a civilian who's got the same wiring, see everything as a challenge. Well, you've automatically got a situation that's likely to go bad because they're both going to feel challenged and they're both going to start making bad decisions. It's got nothing to do with anybody's skin color. So, dial it back to how do we react? How do we talk to people? What kind of neurochemicals do we trigger when we talk? And start with don't be a dick is great advice because it's not going to disadvantage you from the very beginning simply by not the word choice, but the way you choose to deliver the words. And do they land or do they aggravate?
If we could introduce something at the basic level to help people communicate, what do you think it would be? So guys are going to the academy, the recruits, and unfortunately, the people who are in charge of training these recruits typically aren't going to be universally skilled enough to give them everything they need. They may bring something to the table, but there's a lot to learn as a cop. That's why we have 50 different instructors right now, because if you'd like to learn Fourth Amendment, here's this guy. And when you're ready for guns, here's this guy. And he's going to teach you how to work that M4 or that AR-15 like a champ. Not where you're going to be a tier 1 Delta operator, but you're going to be better than the average bear. You'll be better than Fourth Amendment. You want to go out and catch bad guys on the highway? Here's one of the best, or 3 of the best, or 5 of the best criminal interdiction guys in the country. So unfortunately, I think where there's a miss in law enforcement at the academy level is they take one person and try to make them teach everything. It's impossible. So where do you think we could fix some of the communication issues at an academy level?
Across the different disciplines, anybody that is talking about interaction, whether it's verbal or physical interaction, the idea that if you learn how to control your voice and just put a downward inflecting in your tone, like you can speak loudly so that everybody can hear you and still downward inflect. Now, the 2 things that does is it triggers a neurochemical reaction both in you and in them. It helps keep you more level-headed so that you can make better decisions. It also impacts them, and it decreases the likelihood that they're going to do something stupid, or that they're going to comply. They're going to think they're complying when in fact they're not. One of the stops that made Facebook and got all this media attention, which was a legitimate shoot that went bad, and the officer got barbecued for it. In the old phrase, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I don't think was ever spoken by somebody that was judged by 12. Because in today's day and age, it used to be you wouldn't get automatically fired unless you were convicted. Now, the police agencies are going to fire you whether or not you're convicted. And if the jury says it was a good shoot, you're still going to get judged. You're still going to get fired. It's nearly a no-win situation. So the shoot that I'm talking about, the officer told the individual in the car not to reach for his gun. Now, the individual in the car, having been triggered, probably testosterone-driven, seeing it as a challenge, he knows he's not reaching for his gun. He's reaching for his wallet. But there's no way that the police officer knows that. And so when his hands disappear as if he's diving for something, that makes it a good shoot. Now, I'm not saying that any other commands would have made any other different outcome. I would never second guess anybody's moves and say, if he'd have done this, it would have gone differently. Like, you never know that. That's ridiculous to say, if he followed my advice, it wouldn't have happened. I'm not going there. But with a downward inflecting voice, you can speak clearly and loudly. You're going to think better because you're using them. It levels you out. Simultaneously, you're more prepared to fight or react because your thinking is clearer, which is really the issue. How do you put yourself in a frame of mind where you think more clearly? Your voice is automatically going to do that. So if you need to escalate up the force continuum, you're going to make a better decision. The nice fringe benefit there is it decreases the chance that the civilian you're encountering is going to inadvertently do something stupid. And you can do that with simply a downward inflecting voice. So I see that as a self-defense training mechanism. I see that as a firearms training mechanism. And I see that as just a verbal communication mechanism that cuts across all those disciplines.
I'll give advice to the men and women in the law enforcement community of maybe a warning where I say, listen, if you're new and you've never had a good field training program, please, for the love of God, do not let the television show Live PD or On Patrol Live Now or Cops be your field training program. Yes. And I sit us as trainers, and again, I was new, you were new, we were all new once, and I remind our instructors here, guys, some of this stuff sounds very infantile, but put yourself back to week 3 of field training. When you get these questions, don't be offended, like, how do you not know this? Because you were them once. We all came into the academy wet behind the ears. So our job is to, and sometimes in class, when something very silly is asked as a question, I usually preface it with, I am not trying to sound like a dick. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. Let me start with that. But let me try to understand what you're trying to say to me and then try to give you a good response. And no question is just that stupid. And that's why you came here, to get this shit resolved. And I actually can't watch Cops or Live PD because we're big on tactics. We believe at this company, our first priority is to make sure you don't die. And then we'll do everything else. It's the top thing. If you took an academy and just turn the whole thing around where you don't die, that's better than what they're doing now. So just make the whole academy about not dying in the line of duty, and you're 100x better than where you are now.
Right.
But I watch Cops and I'm critical. I'm like, God damn it. Like, where's the thought behind? I say to myself, I don't take the video clips. Where's the thought behind? What are you doing? Like, he's under arrest. You're searching him without handcuffs on. There's no additional goals after this. We're not sitting him in for an interview right away or going for a consent, and the handcuffs are a factor. What are you doing? I remember watching an episode recently where the cop goes, he found like 5 pounds of weed in the car, and he goes, you see that car down the street there? That's my partner's car. Go sit on the hood over there. And they're like in rough areas. I'm like, what is this guy doing? Right. And the guy actually complied, which was crazy. So with that being said, my question is, do you ever watch shows where they're interviewing suspects, like the first 48, and you say to yourself, the kind of interrogator you are, the kind of negotiator you are, and say, oof, he missed a big opportunity right there. They could have done something different.
Yeah, and I don't watch that stuff at all. I mean, I just don't. And, because our approach is so different. When you're really good at talking with people, like, it doesn't, until you know how impactful it is, it doesn't feel good on your end. It doesn't taste good. The words don't taste good. And it's really low key. It's really gentle. And then when you see the impact, you're like, wow, this is cool. I'm doing stuff that I never thought I could do before. I'm getting people to tell me stuff that I never thought I could get them to tell me. And there's so few examples. There's nothing but bad examples in the media. I mean, and I'm watching, last night, I'm watching Zero Dark 30 again, just because I got to kill 20 minutes while my phone recharges. And, the harsh interrogation techniques that the CIA employed in the hunt down bin Laden. And my reaction is the same as it was last night, as the first time I saw it. Like, no wonder it took them so long to find this guy. This is the worst interrogation I've ever seen in my life. Like, if they'd have brought somebody in that knew how to talk to people, they'd have found bin Laden in half the time. And I will openly criticize the harsh interrogation techniques that have been used in the past in terrorism, because harsh interrogation just doesn't work. It's counterproductive.
With the downward inflection, the slow tone, the deeper voice, which actually is profound, and you can really understand it when you're listening to the book. And I want to appreciate you for making an audio version for people like me. It's a big win. I think people make a big mistake when they write a great book and they don't do an audio version, because I would never buy that unless it was on Audible or, Apple, iTunes or some shit. Yeah. Is there ever a time where the downward inflection doesn't work and you have to switch tactics a little bit? And what does that look like?
Well, the downward inflection, what it actually does is it shuts down the other side's brain. While you're tamping down the negative emotions, like you're tamping down everything. I mean, we've got a business negotiation exercise that's straight out of hostage negotiation that we do all the time, where I play a bank robber. I have the students, the attendees, be the hostage negotiator. And I immediately start with the commanding voice in my approach, and it makes people combative. This is the degree that the commanding, the direct and honest, the assertive voice, which to me is just issuing loud and clear commands. This is the impact it has on other people. One of our attendees is sitting still. He's not moving a muscle. He's got an Apple Watch on. He tells us afterwards, as soon as I hit him in the face with the loud, clear, commanding voice, his heart rate immediately jumps to 170. You cannot think clearly if you react like that. So, and I cycle through the voices. My next voice will be the downward inflecting voice. Now, occasionally, that brings the other person's brain to such a screeching halt that they can't even speak. Like, they can't think, they can't speak, they can't move. Which, if you're trying to keep them from doing something stupid, is a great move. But their brain is shutting down. Now, in the event that I need them to start thinking, then I'll smile when I speak. And that restarts the brain in a completely different way. And they'll become more interactive. So if you can even smile during a downward inflecting voice, it helps you keep the situation under control, but their brain doesn't entirely shut down. Because to get somebody to comply or cooperate or collaborate, their brain cannot be seized up. You're going to need it moving, but you need it moving in a way that's not negative. And then when I look back at the cops that I thought were the most masterful that I worked with, they had mastered this soothing voice, but that somehow seemed to have this trace of regard, one human being to another. And people would just comply and not get bent out of shape.
When somebody reacts to what you first put them through and it's a complete anxiety response, how does one control that feeling under pressure?
Well, if you're at the receiving end of it, we'll teach people that's when you shift into the late night FM DJ voice, because to make that shift yourself personally calms you down. And the first thing you need to do is to get the positive side of your brain kicked into gear. Really, the first move is to shut the negative, triggered fight or flight, the mode, survival mode. Turn that negativity down. And so using the voice, it works on you in two levels. You got to make a conscious shift to use it, and it begins to change your neurochemicals. And then when you utter that voice, actually you also hear yourself. So it calms you down on two levels if you've been kicked into a fight or flight mode yourself.
How does one practice getting good at this?
Yeah, well, and that's it. Small stakes practice. Now, it can be part of your conversations normally. You can designate times of the day, like from 11 to noon. This is the only way I'm going to talk to people. The other thing that a lot of people miss is your mental rehearsals. If you can imagine yourself using the voice, that's actually a rehearsal and begins to wire you so that you can do it. And this was another Huberman Lab insight that I got, because I don't remember what the topic was, but he was saying, like, every time when you hear the voice in your head, when you imagine yourself saying something, most of the neural connections that start up your speech are kicked into gear. Like the part of your brain that controls your speech actually kicks into gear. And so that's why imagining yourself saying it properly is just darn near good as actually doing it and getting to practice it.
What other parts of your life outside of, let's say, for these audience members here, do skills like this work for?
Like everything.
Yeah.
Like there isn't a part of my life that human interaction isn't involved with that I'm not using this on a regular basis. Number one, so there's less friction in my life. I don't need to add to the aggravation. I only want to deal with the aggravation I have to. And secondly, for practice, because it's a perishable skill. Another book I'm a fan of, 2002, Jim Camp wrote a book called Start With No. And he referred to negotiation as a human performance event, which, like any sporting endeavor, like firearms, like hand-to-hand combat, jiu-jitsu, whatever your physical discipline is, it requires practice to stay sharp. And I lose my skills just like everybody else does. So I got to practice it regularly, because I negotiate with people, not against them. I use it with my girlfriend. I use it with my family members. I use it with my landlord. I use it with my coworkers, because I want to collaborate productively with everybody. And because I want to do that, they're all accepting of it because they know where I'm coming from.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you about that. I actually have on here, I'm sure a lot of men are listening to this, single men at that. And if you don't follow Chris on Instagram, you'd be very, very impressed to see what his dating life looks like. So that is a compliment through and through, and me trying to be respectful of the fact that you are dating a smoke show. Dude, it is like, so I said, boy, if this doesn't say he's the best negotiator in the world, I don't know what the fuck does.
Wendy Starling. Yes, she's a better person than she is beautiful, and she is beautiful.
Yeah, brother. I mean, and I'm a superficial son of a bitch. And I got to tell you, I'm like, Jesus Christ. How does some of this stuff translate to maybe people having success in dating?
Yeah, same thing. Completely translates. And, every now and then when I was teaching this stuff in business schools, Georgetown at USC, and I'd have my students write papers about their interactions, I'd get a paper from some student that had gotten a young lady's telephone number in a bar when the other guys were swarming around her, and he was the only one that walked away with a number using the negotiation skills. So yeah, it definitely translates.
I would tell people and it's funny, it's in your book. I mean, I'm not some skilled negotiator. I'm a good communicator, I think, probably better than most people. But what I try to do, if I went to a party as a younger guy and I saw a girl that I'd like there, I'd kind of wait till they were like going up to get a drink at the keg or something. And I come by and I just do like a little elbow tap, right? And that was it. Just let her know that I was there, right? Hey, oh, you mind if I just jump in here and grab a cup real fast? Thanks. Whatever it may be. And I would always try to make that physical connection in a very respectful way. I was not a creep. How impactful is it, even for a negotiator or in life, to physically connect with people on top of some of these other tactics?
Yeah, I think, and then context driven. It's extremely helpful. And what you just described is, a short, not disrespectful, physical contact, clearly in a predetermined location. The elbow is a relatively safe spot. It's not an erogenous zone in general terms. And it's also not threatening. I mean, one of the things that we counsel people on, regardless of the negotiation, is the first move for collaboration is to remove yourself as a threat, maintain the other person's autonomy. And so then physical contact is very helpful. Within that context, are you threatening? Where was the physical contact? Is it a direct frontal assault, or is it a little bit of a drive-by, from the side, but not threatening? And it can make all the difference in the world. So physical contact within context of how it's delivered is extremely helpful.
Tell us about the handshake a little bit, because I've worked for 22 years in this field, and I've been on the road in almost 8 now. A lot of police officers get very apprehensive about shaking somebody's hand or even revealing their first name. I try to tell these guys, like, guys, you're one Google search away from finding out who you are. I mean, your first name is no longer a secret like it was 22 years ago. So can we touch on that a little bit? I'm trying to find some stuff that these guys can really use in their profession.
Yeah, well, first name is a power tool. It's a superpower weapon. Because then suddenly you become a human being, and they've connected with you in a very different way. A couple of years ago, and my natural type is assertive, so I can be pretty tough on people. We're going out for an arrest with the bureau. It's one of those big roundups where they're sending 5-6 guys to each house, and there's about 5 of us swarming, and it's a white collar crime arrest. So by and large, we're not expecting problems, and we roll on this dude in his house. Not a big dude, not a threatening dude, criminal, but not violent criminal, and he's a little overwhelmed, and I can see him looking around the room as if he's going to make a break for it. Now, this is not a big dude, and if he makes a run for it on us, just the 5 of us subduing him, even if we try to be gentle, he's probably going to get hurt. And this is completely unnecessary because we're going to take this guy to jail. He's going to get arraigned. He's going to make bond. He's going to be out later that day. There's no point in making a run for it. And so I say to him, look at me. And it catches attention. And then I go, I'm Chris. And immediately he latches on to me because in the midst of all this fear, there's a human being in front of him named Chris. Now, I know how powerful this is for me to go from being the law enforcement swarm that's around him or the threat. As soon as I get he gets my first name, I'm now a human being. And I'm in a position to influence him in a way that I would not have been otherwise. And, then the guy said, look, we're going to take you to jail. You're going to get arraigned and you're going to get out later today. And it's like, oh, okay. Because he didn't know what was going on. And, we took him. So I started with my first name. Giving up your first name is a way for you to become a human being and have influence that an authority figure, a nameless, faceless uniform just doesn't have. And then the handshake, there's something primal in the connection from a good handshake. And it comes from a position of confidence. And that confidence then becomes an emotional contagion where somebody can connect with you. So I'm very much in favor of both.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the Street Cop podcast, do us a favor and give us a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening to us. Tell a friend. We don't charge anything for the episodes. We appreciate your support. Check us out on any social platform by putting into the search bar Street Cop Training. Give us a follow. We have a lot of free content coming out every single day that you might not catch here on the podcast, and it's important for you to be able to do your job more professionally, and we also entertain you as well. Many police officers who are some of the better ones at this craft all have a pack of cigarettes in their duty bag. They're not smokers, but they have a pack of cigarettes. So maybe we could talk about how far does a kind gesture go?
Phenomenal. Again, treating somebody, I think it's a great move. Treating somebody as a human being. It's a great test as well. I mean, you kind of want to know what you're dealing with on the other side. So there are little things that you can do to engage, to show yourself as a human being, to show yourself as someone who's not afraid to lead with respect, even with a little bit of generosity. Then they react positively, you're ahead of the game. They react negatively, you just found out a lot more about the person you're dealing with. So it's a great tool to move forward and also gather a lot of information about the person you're dealing with.
It's so interesting. I try to convey to people, I remember being criticized by a shift commander when I was in the Sally Port, and he calls my cell phone. He's like, why is he smoking in the Sally Port? I'm like, well, where else is he supposed to smoke? He's like, well, why is he smoking? I'm like, because anytime somebody comes in, I like to let them smoke before we go in because my life's going to be much easier. They're calming down. They recognize that I'm not here to give them a hard time, 99.9% of the time. And this guy, he just couldn't understand it. I said, and he was a tough dude in the sense of he was annoying. But he liked me. He was one of these guys that a lot of people don't like him. He liked me because we worked off duty a few times. We chopped it up. We shot the shit. And I have a way of kind of connecting with most people. I try to figure out what makes them tick, what they like. And then we go into that, right? The guy likes fishing. So I'm like, tell me about your boat, right? And he's like, I got a fucking 24. And people are like, he even had a nickname for being a dick. But he loved me. People would say, he loves you. I mean, you bring up your name. He loves you. I go, yeah, because I talk about the things that are important to him. And I understand that something is bothering him every time he comes in here. It's not even, where is he getting his butt kicked in his mind? So I try to make it easy for him. So I come back and I say to him, So this time, I'm letting this guy smoke. And I can't say how many times I've been surprised where literally somebody took a cigarette and on the third pull, they're like, there's a house that got burglarized in this part of town. I'm like, yeah, there was like 3 days ago. Like, yeah, I got a name for that. I'm like, oh, no shit. Right. So I come back and tell him like, hey, I don't want to say his first name until he's dead. Then I'll say his first name. But I said that 50-cent cigarette just saved this whole police department about $20,000 in overtime because now I got a name and it was the guy. You just don't know what people have and how they want to just repay the favor. Maybe you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, on a lot of levels. The first thing that I was thinking about was, there's a reason that cigarette smoking is so addictive. I remember hearing it referred to a long time ago as a drug of choice. Like you can use it to calm yourself down. You can use it to amp yourself up. And people who smoke cigarettes do that. So you give somebody a cigarette and they start taking nice long pulls on it, they're calming themselves down. They're getting into a point where they're being very appreciative. I don't know the host of neurochemicals that are probably triggered by that. One of them is likely to be serotonin, which is a calming drug, a calming neurochemical. But simultaneously, when people get hits of serotonin, they feel more satisfied, which consequently makes them more likely to give you something. So you're kind of hitting them on several levels by giving them a cigarette because they're going to calm down. They're going to feel like giving you something because you gave them something. And secondly, they're getting a hit of their own neurochemicals, which makes them want to give anyway because they're more satisfied. So it works on a lot of levels. It's kind of a hack for relationships, psychology, influence. And there's a long list of stuff there and the reasons why that works.
Is it a good tactic to show empathy and maybe show the person that you're trying to speak with that you're just like them?
Well, there's two different things, and I'll draw a really fine and important line there because empathy is a brilliant move. Empathy increases your decision-making ability. It increases your awareness. It increases your psychological agility. Now, you don't have to be like somebody to be empathic. And they're not expecting you to be like them. And so which actually relieves you of a lot of obligations, because what if you're not like them at all? And what does it look like? What does that sound like? I'll refer to some of my bureau days again. We're interviewing Arab Muslims to voluntarily testify against a Muslim cleric, legitimate Muslim cleric, by anybody's definition, had all the credentials of a cleric and was a criminal. And we're doing it in civilian court, open court, voluntary all the way around. Tell the truth. Seriously, we're not kidding. Tell the truth, nothing but the truth. So I would lead with these guys by saying, you believe that there's been a succession of American governments for the last 200 years that were anti-Islam. Now, that's a definition of empathy. I never said I believed it. I never said I agreed with it. I never said I was a Muslim. I never disagreed with any of it. I just said, this is what you believe. And I just lay it out there like, it's your belief. And they would kind of blink and go, yeah. And they would cooperate happily. And I never disagreed. I never agreed. And they know that I never agreed or disagreed. But I connected with them on empathy. I didn't need to be like them. I will tell you that we demonstrated so much respect for their position and their perspectives. I would often get asked if I was Muslim.
Oh.
And I would say, no, not at all. I mean, I'm in point of fact, I have my own beliefs. They're very Christian, but I respect your belief. So it's so powerful if you know how to do it. They'll feel that you're like them, but there's no obligation on my behalf to be like them.
Is it more difficult to try to maybe gauge somebody's feeling about you over the phone versus in person? Obviously, I imagine that you're speed reading my face. When I was going to therapy for a while, I'm telling my therapist, I'm like, I know what you're fucking doing, right? Like I teach body language behavior. I know I'm aware of everything. You're paying attention. I'm shifting my legs. I'm leaning back. I'm smiling when I'm sipping water. These are all the things that I teach. And I know that I can't control it because I'm trying to be very vulnerable with you. So I'm allowing you to read me because I want you to help me. And that's why I'm here. So what's the difference between the two? Matt, you must be speed reading my face. You have to be. Because I'm speed reading yours.
My real training on reading somebody started on the crisis hotline, and then a negotiator, all we got is a phone. All we got is a voice. So you kind of get used to that. And when you get used to it, then you get good at it. And if you haven't been started that way from the beginning, like most of us got a massive amount of visual information, and that's how we learn it. And that's where we look for the cues. But when you got no choice, and I was initially rejected to become a hostage negotiator. I mean, I was flat out told I was unqualified, and the person that told me that was 100% right. And my response was, okay, well, what do I got to do to get qualified? And she said, go volunteer on a suicide hotline now until you've done that. Stop bothering. And I'm like, okay. And then I went to the hotline, and they taught me, all you got is a voice to feed on. And it's a little like one of my favorite stories. There's some jokes out there that Stevie Wonder's not really blind. And one of them is Shaq tells a story where he's in an apartment building, and they both got a place. I don't know where he's at. It's probably LA or something. And he's standing there waiting for the elevator, and the elevator door opens, and Stevie Wonder's in there with one of his handlers. And nobody says anything to anybody. Shaq is just standing there. Nobody said a word. And Stevie Wonder says, hey, Shaq, how you doing, big dog? And walks by him. Because having had his sight taken away, Stevie Wonder's paying attention to every other sense. His sense of smell. Like, is there such a thing as aura? Who knows? Maybe Shaq's got a cologne that only one person in the entire world has. Or maybe Shaq's got a way of breathing. I would imagine Shaq's breathing sounds different than anybody else's. But as soon as you start confining your senses to certain avenues, then you could pick stuff up if you're really digging in deep in one area. So I'm a voice guy. I definitely roll on just what I hear in my ears.
When did you start getting confident with that?
It's practice. I understood the process, and I was willing to practice the process as told. And then when suddenly it started working, I was like, hey, wow. Okay, I guess I follow the instructions as told, and woohoo, it works. And then I just thought, this is cool. And I kept after it because it was very satisfying.
Obviously, if you've read the book, Chris has been a part of a lot of significant negotiations with hostage rescue. Are there any ones that haunt you? Any things that turned out the way you didn't want them to turn out? Anything that keeps you up at night?
Well, so first of all, they ain't all going to turn out good. The hostage negotiators have a really high batting average, but it's not 1,000. Ballpark, it's 93, 94%. I say 93. A couple of my colleagues like to round up and say 94. But that still means that once you cross double digits, you're in the red zone. And just based on the numbers, something's going to go bad. The first time something went bad, in a big way for me, was right after a big victory in the Philippines. Very next case, 2 out of 3 Americans were killed. One of them was murdered by the terrorists. Guillermo Sabero, they cut his head off early in the case. And about 12 months later, there was a botched rescue attempt where Martin Burnham was killed and his wife, Gracia, was wounded by friendly fire.
Right.
And I, at the time, my former boss, Gary Nessner, he had taught me the phrase best chance of success, which I'd been saying. And then when something finally went bad, I thought, well, best chance of success, I guess by definition means that every now and then something's going wrong. Now, do they haunt me? I've had cases where people died and I've been completely determined that the lessons would be applied for the betterment of everybody. I would learn from it. I would find a way to get better. Post-traumatic stress growth. So they don't keep me up at night. I ain't happy about them, But I think the stuff that keeps you up at night will keep you up at night until you learn and then apply the knowledge. And ultimately, the net effect of the loss is better for the world. And that's what I've tried to do on the different people that have got killed, on the different cases I've been involved in. You know, how do we make this ultimately work out badly for the bad guys so that the loss of life wasn't in vain?
We have a group associated with this company called the Street Cop Survivors Club, and it actually was something that I put together as an idea and a thought for the men and women in law enforcement, for them to have a Facebook group. And it's actually more of a therapy group and a camaraderie group. And these folks have been significantly injured, and many of them shot in the line of duty. One of the close guys, one of the first guys that when we started doing this training, and we had a small Facebook group, Matt Zaleski, was shot like 5 or 6 times in the line of duty. So, you know, it's funny that we're talking about this morning in our group chat as the conference. We have a conference annually. It's coming up in Nashville, Tennessee. We have about 1,500 to 1,700 people, give or take, coming to that conference in about a week. So they're coming as well. We're setting stuff up for them. They're doing a lot of charity work. And, you know, Matt started revealing some of the real difficulties of what it was like to go through what he went through. It's a really crazy story. He ended up he works in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and he gets shot up, and he drives to the closest first aid squad in the middle of nowhere. And there's like 3 15-year-old kids playing basketball, and he climbs out of his car and he's telling them how to put tourniquets on him. Like it's really crazy story. So, you know, he said it's very, very difficult. You know, it's very difficult and I talk about you guys a lot in class, and there's no romance to being shot. There's no good story to tell the chick you're trying to impress at the bar. When you have so much radiating pain in your body, you're constantly considering taking your own life. I mean, it's brutal. And I said, but, you know, God has chosen you. I don't know why he chose you to be this person, but I've seen your work with these people in the group, right? I don't know why he had to put you through the pain, but now, as I see it for you, you are here as a chosen one to help guide others who are going through it as well. He's doing a hell of a job at it too as well.
Wow.
So it's the same thing. You know what I mean? I think it correlates to the same thing. The pain we go through, there's a purpose behind some of that pain. It's hard to see at times. It really is.
Amen. Yeah. And, you know, I got nothing compared to that. And, you know, and especially if you have a strong belief in God, that you probably look up in the sky and go like, I must have been a rat bastard in a previous life, because I don't know what I did to deserve this here.
I think, and I think everybody has those moments in life, and just people have to be reminded that life is not fair. It just isn't. And when you could submit that life's not fair, you know, especially, and we'll talk about this, I had people in here before, and I'm like, they're like, how's business? I'm like, it's fucked up, right? It's great, but it's fucked up. I mean, it's so fucked up that I would never recommend anybody getting into a successful business. It's fucking horrific, especially when you're trying to take police officers and make them better in a society loaded with these nut jobs who are doing everything they can to try to stop the police from catching criminals. You know, it's a very daunting task, and I see you have Mandela behind you on the wall. As fucked up as this sounds, and I can't compare myself to 27 years of imprisonment and Nelson Mandela, I think about what he did for the world. I think about the kind of impact that man had and the kind of example he was. And, you know, at times I'm like, man, we are having major impact. We have countless lives that have been saved through our work. And it's tough, man. And I just keep telling all our instructors, like, I know things are tough. I know things get tough. I know things are very daunting. But you can't forget about the person who's receiving your efforts and what it meant to them, and the family that has their father there for Christmas. And he calls you and tells you, I'm alive because of something you did. So no matter what these people throw at you, understand this has nothing to do with us, right? And all God does once in a while is throw you a little fucking pocket change to go treat yourself to a trip to Ibiza or some shit, right? But the reality is, like, you're doing so much more for the world. But, you know, as I say that, I want to kind of maybe lead you into how was the transition from going from a government agent, public servant into the private industry? What was that transition like? What triggered in your brain that said, you know what? I could take this, create this Black Swan group and go and do something really fucking cool. There must have been something that gave that light bulb.
Well, I always felt like I was entrepreneurial my whole life. My father had a small businessman. I wanted to approach law enforcement in a very entrepreneurial fashion. Having no idea what being an entrepreneur was really involved in. I mean, it's a tough go. And if you don't have some of the factors going for you that increase your survivability. Now, the first of which is, you want to go fast, go alone, you want to go far, go as a team. From the early days, like my son was a critical aspect of whether or not the Black Swan group survived at all, because I wasn't in it by myself. And then I was fortunate enough, smart enough, I knew that something was there. I knew that there was a need for it. I knew it worked, but I waited till I got a pension because I knew, all right, so worst comes to worst, I got a few dollars coming in every month. I'll be able to pay my rent. And there's a lot of liberation there if I'm not worried about paying a rent by being an entrepreneur, because if you haven't got enough cushion to get you through at least 3 years, you're going to be clenched up trying to pay the rent, and you're not going to be as smart or as effective as you could be. You got to get out of the day-to-day mode. And then I took jobs teaching, and I was lucky enough to, through strength of relationships and delivering and working with people that wanted to help me, I got a couple of pretty good breaks, which opened up the doors for teaching. And then I got a teaching salary supplementing my pension so that we could pay the bills while we worked on first getting a book out and then building a company. So it was really that I didn't have to go it alone. And then I had enough of a lifeline to keep it going till it kicked into gear. And finally it did. I mean, the world was hungry for this kind of book, and still is, fortunately. And one of the interesting comments, Tal Ross, co-author, my son Brandon and Tal and I really wrote the book together. Brandon didn't get any credit, really. But Tal told me not long ago, he said another man told him, your book gives men permission to talk about emotions for the first time ever. Like, men weren't allowed to talk about emotions. And now you're giving them a mechanism and a way to talk about it. So it's been kind of an interesting ride, far different than I imagined it would be before I got in the middle of it.
What surprised you the most about some of the work that you're doing? For example, I never forget receiving the first Facebook message from a gentleman, and I don't want to say what state it's in, but the actual message is my last slide in my program. And I was on another program and I read it for the interviewer. But basically it was, I was going to kill myself, but
Wow.
I didn't because of you. And subsequently, from that point forward, probably at this point now, and I've lost count, over 20 people have come up to me knowing that story, typically after class, and very, very emotional. And I actually had to reach out to some of my psychologist friends and said, like, hey, I don't know what to do when this happens. And I don't want to just be like, all right, well, I'm glad you didn't do it. Right. So, how do I behave? And so I'm asking that. So I never thought, when I sat with a pad like this in a marked patrol car and started taking notes about the things that I saw and why I was so successful, and people would ask me, what do you know? And people are field training, coming out, going to narcotics divisions in a year, 2 years. I started taking notes. I had no idea. And then I learned PowerPoint because I hated fucking computers because I'm a cop, right? And I had no idea that, 10 years later, 11 years later, that somebody would say, I decided not to kill myself because of you. Do you have stories similar to that? Again, not maybe so morbid but something that you never expected to come out and never split the difference, or the work that you're doing through the Black Swan group that you're like, you can even say something like, yeah, I was teaching a class and before you know it, I was on a fucking $90 million yacht cruising a fucking, Turks and Caicos. And there's just when you start doing things, sometimes just weird shit surprises you.
Well, we get, thank you for changing my life. I do, the guys on my team, we get that on a regular basis. I didn't expect that. This deal is going to change my life. We hear that a lot also. I mean, changing people's lives is the kind of satisfactory stuff that we get. And we usually get it from regular people. That's the thing that I think is coolest. Like somebody who comes up to me and says something like that, it's a really regular human being as opposed to some corporate CEO bureaucrat from some large corporation who doesn't really care about anything other than getting ahead. I mean, we get it. I get it regularly from just real solid regular people, and that to me is immensely gratifying.
Tell me about the relationship with your son.
Yeah, wonderful and horrible. My son is as much of a maverick and as independent as I am. The blessing and the curse. We are so much alike in so many ways, and he's headed his own direction. He's been phenomenal in making sure that people know who the hell I am. Like without my son helping me in my company, nobody would have any idea who I am. And he's then grown through those stages. He's a great dad. He's a great father. He's a great husband. And he's an entrepreneur on his own. And so, he got me to this point, and he's on a process of splitting out on his own because he doesn't like answering to anybody any more than I do.
Man, that's interesting. You must be super proud, though.
Oh, he's a phenomenal human being. I'm very proud of him. He's about all the right things. He's an independent guy, and yeah, he's somebody I'm really proud of.
Well, if he's the guy behind you pixeling the fuck out of me every time I go on Facebook and I just hear, impression is the last impression. What's the lie? That's why I literally wake up. I'm like checking I'm like, just Chris Voss. I'm just getting fucking pixeled to death on this, but it's a good thing. Give me your pixeling guy.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, today you were just on a podcast recently with Lauren Tickner.
Yes.
So it's so funny because she's supposed to be on my podcast today because we're in a mastermind group together. So I was like, isn't that fucking funny? I'm like, hey, I'm having Chris on in a couple of weeks. And she's like, yeah, I just had him. He's fucking awesome. But I can't do her accent because she has such a unique Tickner, right?
Yeah.
Cool ass fucking girl. It's so interesting how this all works out. Any few tips that we haven't covered for law enforcement before we kind of roll this thing to a close here today?
Really the calm is contagious. Calm gives you the upper hand. Calm helps level you out. Calm helps you make better decisions. Stick to your training. And just it makes your life better and it makes you happier simultaneously. So a little calm, a little patience go a long, long way.
I think it's a good one. Where can they find stuff about Chris Voss? What do you offer? Where's the books? What's the books? All of it.
The best spot is the website, blackswanltd.com. And then the first place to go on the website is, and by the way, it's BLACKSWAN. There ain't double N's and N. We're not trying to spell it some sort of exotic way. LTD.com. If you sign up for the newsletter is complimentary, but what really matters is it's actionable and it's concise. Consequently, when you sign up for the newsletter, you give us your email address, you get an email on Tuesday morning, wherever you are in the world. Then that becomes the gateway to everything we have. We got a lot of free stuff. If you can't afford our high-speed training, number one, you're probably not ready for it. We've got all the stuff that you need to get you ready to raise the level of your game, wherever you are in the world. You're a street cop, you're entrepreneurial CEO of a $200 million business, whatever your starting point is. We've got stuff to get you started and get you rolling. And the free stuff at a bare minimum is going to get you a long way and make life a lot easier. So go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and start to accelerate your life.
What's your Instagram handle?
At the FBI Negotiator.
And guys, if you like, listen, this was a treat for me today. I mean, I was pumped when Frankie told me, he's like, yeah, Chris, respond. This is great. And I'm like, excellent, because the book meant a lot to me, dude. So much that I listened to it 3 times.
Thank you.
And I'll probably knock another one out soon. And I don't know of maybe Grant Cardone's The Rule of 10X, just so we're clear. I might have listened to that one twice because sometimes I need to get kicked in the ass a tad.
Right.
And just remember, sometimes we get so far into our businesses that we forget some of the principles that are the most important things about business. And we overcomplicate what could be much more simplified. We get so much into the weeds, we forget about getting on the mountaintop and looking down and saying, this is not, you're getting too far into that bullshit. Let's do some simplified stuff.
Amen.
But also on YouTube, you can put in Chris Voss on YouTube. There's a lot of great stuff that you guys put out that I watch. And so
Thank you.
I thought you were going to run me through one of those. All right, you got 10 seconds. I would have been like, I already know this shit, bro. I've been watching this shit for like 2 years now. But with that being said, man, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. It means a lot to a lot of people, and namely me. And, I don't think any of this stuff is done without, some good stuff coming back your way. So I appreciate it so much. It's anything we can do for you here. Anytime you have something you want to promote, please let us know. I'd be elated to help you out. Just as one blue line brother to another. And we do this a lot with a lot of people. And if you ever get to hear about me from somebody else, I'm sure they're going to tell you that, like, nah, he's a fucking solid dude. You'll never hear a story of me being a fucking scumbag. I just don't do it. I don't care.
Good for you. It doesn't do you any good.
No, listen, you could say that you want, that guy's an asshole. He makes fun of ticket writing cops. Oh, he thinks he's hot shit, this and that. He's fucking Jersey Shore. Anything you hear, but what you will never hear that I ever scumbagged anybody. I've never fucking eaten cheese with a long tail. I've never kicked somebody in the back when they were down. I never stabbed in your back. I never talked shit behind your back. Maybe that's not true a little, that one I vent sometimes. But outside of that, I run my business as squarely as I possibly can. And, sometimes they come in here, my staff, and they're like, hey, they want a refund. And because they're going to pull fucking 20 guys out because of this. And I went, I go like, so just give them the money back. Like, but then the balance, I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter, right? Just give them the fucking money back. It's okay. Like, we don't need to start playing games with other people's shit. And, it always comes back 20-fold. 3 days later, it's like, hey, it's the state of Nebraska. We want to spend $50,000 on a class. And I'm like, see, that's why you always got to do the right thing. Always.
Amen. Yep. Yeah, great.
It was nice meeting you, Chris. I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure was mine. Thanks for having me.
All right, brother. I'll see you. Guys, if you're in an area where you're trying to get to our classes, but we're not close to you, fret not. We actually have on-demand training at streetcop.com. You can take that course online right now, and then you could attend that training in the future at no additional cost. You can redeem your voucher, so you get 2 for the price of 1. We don't want to deny you the ability to take this training now, especially knowing that it can keep you safe, at a very minimum, putting bad guys in jail where they belong, and at the maximum, going home to your family. Check out streetcop.com for that offer.